Thank you, Paul. What an excellent way to start us off. Now, on to our next session, which I am so excited to share with you. More and more enterprises are adopting behavioral tools to supercharge their Microsoft email security. Our next speaker is sharing a deep dive look into how they built high-impact defense in depth by augmenting Microsoft with machine learning technology. This session is packed with takeaways for teams to supercharge their email security. Enjoy the Defense in Depth Playbook, how to augment Microsoft 365 to supercharge email security, with Josh Yavor, CISO at Tessian, and Matt Pascucci, Director Security Operations at Evercore.
Thanks, Stacia, and hello, everyone. I'm Josh Yavor, Chief Information Security Officer here at Tessian, and I'm thrilled to welcome Matt, Director of Security Operations at Evercore, and a Tessian customer to our virtual stage today. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Let's dive right into it. We've got a lot to talk about today. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your role leading security operations at Evercore so we can get an idea of what's within your scope and purview and what your day-to-day looks like?
Sure, yeah. So my role at Evercore is to manage a team that is focusing on security operations. And that means anything that looking for, active alerts, emerging threats, anything that's going to affect our business in a negative way from a cyber standpoint. So we're doing a lot of proactive work. We're doing a lot of reactive work by investigating alerts and doing such. So anything that kind of fits within that realm of monitoring and detecting threats today, we kind of take part of.
Got it. And as part of that broad security operations domain, an age-old reality is the need for defense in depth, right? How do you think about defense in depth at a strategic level at Evercore? And are there any strategies that you can share around how you've approached a layered security architecture?
Yeah, so, there's no silver bullet with anything. So we're always looking for ways to layer on additional defenses. If we have a particular area where we're strong in, there's always going to be areas that, we shouldn't always be relying on that one area. So as we speak about, throughout the next couple of minutes on Tessian, is like we have multiple ways of protecting against email, but why do we use Tessian? Why do we use other ways of protecting ourselves in defense in depth? It's because we don't want to rely on one area. I think that's just a tenet of security that we have to continually focus on. That can go from a network, it can go to the endpoint, it can go to anything, application security. Wherever we are, we can't rely on one particular area or control, and we have to have those mitigating controls in place, those supplemental controls in place, so that if one was to either get bypassed, had an issue, there's an outage, whatever, that we're not just sitting there wide open, that we have other ways of detecting or at least reducing the impact of an attack or a threat or something within our environment so that we can contain it. So never relying on one particular area or control is a tenet of security, and that goes down to the network level, to the endpoint level, to the application level. And I think that's something that we're focusing on heavily, and as the industry is, right? So definitely something I would recommend. That's why I think we're using Tessian, and we'll get more involved with that, is helping us to determine and detect very nuanced alerts from email security.
Right, and diving into the email security layers there, right, and thinking about defense in depth, how have you layered email security approaches, including Tessian, to protect Evercore?
So there's a lot there, right? So, as everyone knows, Microsoft is fantastic at what they do, but there's always areas of improvement everywhere, right? So we don't rely on just Microsoft alone. We use it, it's known, but we make sure that we have Tessian there built in so that when our users are either clicking on things or reviewing things or data is being sent, that we have an extra area to supplement, to validate that we're doing what we should be doing, our due diligence, that we have everything in place so that if there was something from a, like we use, like Defender, right? If there's any type of impersonations, if there's any type of misdirections of emails or insider threats, those type of things that Tessian offers, we can get down an extra layer that at the time Microsoft is helpful with, but the partnership, I wouldn't even call it supplemental, but the partnership between Tessian and Microsoft is what makes everything combined, right? That's what's really helping us become better, is by not just we're talking like that almost a defense in depth area where it's like, well, this one does this layer and then this one does the next layer. It gets very interesting when we can have them integrated, and that's what we're looking to accomplish with Microsoft and Tessian, is that integration, that interplay between the two of them, where they're almost following up on each other, and that's where this defense in depth really becomes helpful. With is when we can have partners like the two of you guys that are working together that give the customers the best advantage of both worlds.
Right. It's definitely a very crowded space in terms of not just vendors and solutions, but also attacker behaviors and risks that people need to address in terms of protecting their organizations. So thinking about the Tessian and Microsoft integrated value that you've built out at Evercore, how do you think about the balance of capabilities and getting that right? And so some of the things that, actually one thing that we share, right, is that in my role, I also am a Tessian customer. I just happen to be employed by Tessian. So this is always top of mind for me because we use our own product, of course. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you balance the applying a rule-based approach for security to leaning on solutions like Tessian that bring behavioral approaches to protection for email as well. How do you think about where rules fit in and where behavioral-based solutions fit in?
So that's a good question. So rule-based is, in my opinion, that's the table stakes, right? You need to have the rules there. Like, that's in place. It should be there. It's working. And then as you kind of mature out there, you start bringing in the ML, you start bringing in the behavior. It's difficult to come out there and say, we're only going to do behavior, right? It's also difficult to also say, we're only going to do rules. So you need to have that both in some type of mentality where they're going to build off of each other. So it's just similar to like signatures today in antivirus. People going back and forth being like, oh, we're only behavioral. It's like, well, if you can have a signature to know a known threat, like why would you want to use behavior? So building off of the rules, from an email perspective, like email security perspective, is great. But then taking that another notch up, like this is where we're talking about the Tessian world. It's like that behavior is now where we're starting to look at, maybe something wasn't firing with a rule, or maybe there's been something very nuanced or something that we're catching that the rules can't catch because they're not as direct. And that's the exciting part for me and our team, is where we can start going out there looking at things that, we have this, machine learning or this behavior where someone wasn't doing something malicious, but they were doing something suspicious. Like, let's dig into that a little bit. And that's where we can start really gathering more detail and getting that understanding of, okay, that wasn't overtly wrong, but it was definitely something we want to keep our eye on. And that's where the behavior comes outside of the rules. You get those outliers. And the outliers are the ones that I want to focus on. That we want to start looking at. The rules are always going to be there, and they're great. And we rely on them heavily, I'd say, for the majority of things, right? The interesting ones that the rules can't catch, that's where the behavior comes in. That's where I think as an industry, we're seeing a lot of people move towards.
Right, absolutely. I think one thing, thinking about like my experiences and that of my teams, one thing I've noticed, I'm curious what your experience has been and how you think about this this balance as well. Is the management aspects of the tooling and capabilities we just talked about. I found that there's, and it's different for each team and organization, of course. But I think there's an interesting trade-off between the management overhead and the requirements for investing in rule definitions, tuning, and so on, as attacker behaviors change, as organizations change as well. How do you and your team approach getting that balance of management investment right? And are there any strategies that have worked well for you in terms of enabling scalable and effective outcomes?
Well, I think it's going to be tuning always, right? There's always going to be tuning in some way, even from the behavior side of things. Like, there's going to be certain alerts that are coming in from the behavior side that are like, hey, we know these, we know what this is, we should get down to the details and make sure that that's not happening from a behavior side, because that's known and that's fine. Now with the rules, it's a little bit easier to tune because it's very more it's binary, right? It's on or it's off. It's found something or it didn't. The behavior ones is definitely the area of tuning where even with Microsoft, right? So we can get things tuned by the way that we respond to certain things, and our response is helping tune systems. You have that type of mentality going out there. So we have to constantly be looking at it. That's really what it comes down to. Understanding your tool set, understanding what systems that you have in place and what they have to offer and exactly what they're giving you, and not just letting them just alert. So if there's alerts that are coming out, we need to be able to dig into them, understand them, tune them from every direction so that we're also tuning the behavior. So there's going to be behavior built into a system, and it's going to, by itself, right? It's programmed to do a thing. And if we can go out there and have that thing now learn from us on how we react to those alerts, we're now training it on how to respond better. And that's something that I think we as an industry need to be consistently doing, not just relying on the machine learning of saying this was bad, but more so of why was it bad, and then determining on, hey, that wasn't bad, and by responding back to the system, you're teaching it to say, going forward, we've seen X, Y, and Z happen. Their response is going to be this, and then the machine learning kind of learns from you based off of the algorithms that it has kind of in place, and I think that's helpful across the board, because otherwise we have Skynet, and Skynet's not a good thing.
Yeah, nobody wants that, at least not yet. Although, if I recall correctly, didn't we just pass a few years ago the go live date for Skynet? I forget when that was, but I think at least from movie lore, we're past that point of risk. But maybe it's any day now.
Encouraging. It's encouraging.
Or maybe it just means that our robotic overlords are just on the horizon, so to speak. So you mentioned something really important that I don't think we spend enough time talking about as an industry, especially in email security in particular. I find in talking to other Tessian customers and talking to my peers, just more broadly in the industry, that while we have very consistent and reliable security operations, playbooks and coverage and so on for many domains of alerts and attack surfaces that we protect, I find that it's surprisingly diverse in what security operation components are in place for email specific security. And so can you tell us a little bit more about how you actually operationalize the actually like after alert, after event type of activity that either Microsoft or Tessian is bringing to your team's attention? How do you think about what's important to respond to and get that operationalization right?
So I guess from that standpoint, it's going to be tuning, right? So we're going to have to know the system. We can't just rely on the alerts that come out of it or the information that comes out of it. So understanding the system, having that cadence with vendors to go out and say, like, what new features do you have? How are we dealing with these new alerts or anything that's coming through? Doing that baseline check of the actual system, either that's Microsoft, that's Tessian, what have you, but just knowing your tools, right? Understanding what that is. So then you get more involved with the training of, okay, now that we know our tools, we understand it, what does that mean from training aspect from both the admins as well as the users? So, we have a lot of user training that we go through. I think everyone in the industry does, or they should be going through that. So as they see certain things and, they're aware of what's happening through their email and what have you, there's a way to react to that. There should be an expected understanding of what's expected from a user, what's expected from an admin, both from a user receives an email and they get a pop-up from Tessian, what does that mean? And then from an admin, understanding, hey, that pop-up actually happened, or there's something going on in the background, what does it mean from an alert standpoint? So having the tuning, having the education on it is very important from both the administrative side of things as well as the user side of things. And also I think is kind of important is documentation. So, as everybody starts building and growing their systems and growing their teams, and you want to kind of have that documentation done first, and that's an internal thing. That's kind of like eating your own dog food kind of deal is, you're building something out, you're getting it done. How does the rest of your team know? How do you have junior staff come on board? How do you have people who for the very first time are using Tessian either as an admin or using it as a user? What does that mean? So understanding that, documenting it, so that it's not the first time people are seeing something. Because I guarantee you that you're going to come across something, and then within the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks, you're going to see it again, or somebody else is going to see it again. How do you not have to be reinventing the wheel every single time? So, I guess to answer that question, just is it's a constant tuning of the system. It's understanding your tool set. It's understanding your training. So you got to trust in your training, and then going out there and just kind of document everything, and then kind of trust in your documentation. So that's how, I mean, you can apply that to anything really, but that's
Right.
also another way of doing it with Tessian. Yeah.
That's great, and you mentioned something in that overview that I think is really important to talk more about as well, which is the actual experience for day-to-day people working at an organization in email, right? So you mentioned the engagement that occurs, for example, when Tessian Defender flags something as potentially risky or malicious. How does that fit into what we think at Tessian we call it human layer security, right? But what does that mean in terms of you and your team and your organization in terms of engaging with and effectively empowering the actual people that you're supporting when those things happen? How do you think about getting that right?
So like when we get those alerts, and we get alerts like that, our investigation kicks off, and we start understanding why it was caused. And then as we start getting through that, there might be things where we have to reach out to a user. There might be things where we need to do more information in the background, right? So if someone is, and this is good, once again, this can go across the board, but if you're seeing someone doing something malicious right away, and they're like, hey, this is bad, then you have to start doing more of a, incident response, and start, going through your process, going through your procedures, understanding, what caused this and why. There's other things where there's going to be blocks where they're, as misdirected emails, right, from the user standpoint, like they should understand exactly what that means and, what it's caused, and just making sure that they don't, not that they don't do it again, but this is there to protect them. It's not there to stop business. It's there to assist with certain things. So just understanding the tools, how to react to those alerts, both from a user standpoint, because they're going to get pop-ups, and then from the the administrative standpoint, as when they get alerts, and that goes back down to training. And documentation, and we're gonna that's just a constant operational thing, because we're seeing this day in and day out. If you're seeing it more than twice, it should be repeatable, and it should be documented, and that's something that we're just aiming to make sure that we're efficient, and it's one of those things that's kind of lives in operations.
Got it. So we've gone into pretty good depth here for a bit, and we're coming up on time shortly. So let's zoom back out a bit. Still staying within the theme of email security, but maybe we can wrap up with this question and theme. One of the things that we're seeing, and Gartner has actually called out as well, is a trend where organizations, especially newer organizations or those that have recently made a shift from on-prem to cloud-based email and collaboration, is that traditional solutions like secure email gateways are not necessarily being utilized in the same way that they used to be. And as an organization that's using Microsoft and Tessian in tandem, when you step back and beyond Evercore and just look out across the industry, what do you think about that trend? And do you think that how do you think about getting the right tooling in place as part of our new world of cloud-based emails?
Yeah, I mean, well, the future is the cloud, whether that's going to be from, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, SaaS, wherever they're going, and wherever those organizations are moving towards. If you're in the cloud, then you got to go. Like, yeah, it's not like you're going to have, you're dragging this anchor of the on-prem solutions with you. So if you're going cloud, it's going to be all cloud. That's just the way of the future. That's my personal opinion. That's not an Evercore opinion. That's just kind of where we are, what I'm seeing personally in the industry, like you said. So just moving towards the cloud, it's going to assist, in my personal opinion, on how things are being done from an operational standpoint, how things are being done from even just a budgetary standpoint of, like, do we want to keep on all these old school data centers and keeping all these things in on-prem, but having things more in the cloud, where now there's less ownership, but there's also, at the same point, you have the ability to essentially just transform the way you're doing things, right? There's less patching, there's less issues with hardware, but at the same point, you're getting the benefits of the resiliency, and you're getting the benefits of just having that cloud environment where you're able to scale better. So as companies are going to the cloud, we're seeing that scalability. We're seeing people just kind of go out there and just cover their infrastructure in a very diverse manner, which does not lead towards having things on-prem. And I think that's the trend, and that's the trend that trajectory's been going for the past 5-10 years now. So I just don't see that slowing down in any way. So that Gartner review that you were saying before is people moving more towards cloud, and it's all there. Everyone's going that way. It's you can't stop that train. So
Right.
there is definite benefits there. There's also going to be the additional risk of now understanding where your data is, compliance and governance, and what does that mean by having some of these solutions and services outside of your purview. And so it's a double-edged sword, but you look at it from the security standpoint, it's probably something of need, and it's definitely helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. This unfortunately is all the time we have for today, but I just want to appreciate you joining us, sharing your experiences and these insights, Matt. And it was great again to just hear your thoughts on building layered and robust email security defenses and so on. So with this, I'll be handing it back over to Stacia, who will take us into our next session. So please stay tuned.